The early morning sunlight streamed through the curtains of our suburban home, painting the kitchen in a soft glow. I sat at the table, staring at the swirling steam rising from my coffee. The aroma, once a comforting start to the day, now did little to calm the unease creeping up my spine. From the living room came bursts of laughter, not the usual familial warmth but something sharper, almost secretive. I strained my ears, letting the words pierce through the barrier of my denial. "Dad's so clueless," Alex's voice rang out, followed by a chuckle that seemed to mock me. Brooklyn's response was sharper, deliberate. "That's why this will work. He'll never see it coming." The coffee cup in my hand trembled slightly. I placed it on the table with deliberate care, my movement stiff, as if acting normally could ward off the storm building inside me. My heartbeat thudded in my ears as their conversation became muffled by distance, but the damage was already done. Suspicion, long dormant, had now ignited into certainty. For months, the signs were there. Brooklyn's frequent late nights at the office, claiming work deadlines that seemed never-ending. The subtle shifts in her demeanor, distraction during our conversations, a coldness in her tone. Alex, once my ally in this family, had grown distant too, choosing his mother's side in every minor disagreement. And then there were the unexplained charges on our credit card, expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never set foot in, boutique items she claimed were for work events. Each piece had been piling up, but I had shoved them aside, unwilling to confront the truth. Until now. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I went through the motions, pretending everything was fine. I helped Alex with his school project, a half-hearted attempt on his part, made worse by his thinly veiled annoyance at my presence. Brooklyn was cheerful, almost unnaturally so, humming a tune as she cooked dinner. But I noticed the fleeting glances between her and Alex, the unspoken connection that left me on the outside. That night, as Brooklyn lay asleep beside me, her breathing soft and even, I stared at the ceiling, unable to shut my mind off. I needed answers, but more importantly, I needed proof. If I confronted her now, she'd deny everything, maybe even turn the blame on me. I'd seen how sharper words could be when she felt cornered. No, I needed something undeniable. Slipping out of bed as quietly as I could, I tiptoed to the kitchen. The dim light from the street lamp outside provided just enough visibility. My hands worked quickly but steadily as I mounted the tiny security camera above the cabinet facing the kitchen table. It was discreet, almost invisible unless someone knew to look for it. As I secured the last screw, a thought crossed my mind. What if I'm wrong? What if this invasion of privacy destroys what little trust remains? But the echo of their earlier conversation silenced my doubts. I had to know. I tested the camera on my phone, ensuring the live feed worked flawlessly. Satisfied, I returned to the bedroom. Brooklyn stirred slightly as I climbed back into bed, mumbling something incoherent before turning on her side. I stared at her for a moment, the woman I had loved for over 2 decades. How had we gotten here? How had I become so invisible to her that she could plot against me with our own son? The following morning, I pretended nothing had changed. Over breakfast, Brooklyn chatted about her plans for the day, her tone bright and casual. "Thomas is hosting a late meeting tonight," she said, referring to her boss. "I might be home late. Don't wait up, okay?" "Sure," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Alex barely looked up from his phone, shoveling cereal into his mouth with disinterest. "How's school?" I asked, attempting a connection. "Fine," he muttered, his eyes never leaving the screen. Brooklyn shot me a quick glance, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. "Alex has been doing great," she said, her voice overly sweet. "He's working so hard." "Yeah, I'm sure," I said, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. Brooklyn's eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing. The tension between us felt like a physical presence, filling the room. After they left, the house fell into silence. I spent the day at work, distracted by thoughts of what the camera might reveal. Every hour felt like an eternity. When I finally returned home that evening, I wasted no time. Sitting at my desk, I pulled up the footage on my laptop. My heart pounded as I clicked through the clips, each moment bringing me closer to the truth. The following week felt like an eternity. I went through the days mechanically, exchanging pleasantries with Brooklyn and Alex, pretending not to notice their secret glances. My body was present, but my mind was elsewhere, fixated on what I might uncover when I reviewed the footage. Finally, the house was quiet. Brooklyn had gone to another late meeting with her boss, Thomas, and Alex was in his room, blasting music through his headphones. With trembling hands, I opened my laptop, logged into the camera's app, and began scrolling through the recordings. My heart raced as I found the clip labeled with a timestamp from the previous morning. Pressing play, I watched as the scene unfolded in my familiar kitchen. Brooklyn sat at the table, her posture relaxed, a steaming mug in her hand. Alex slouched opposite her, his arms crossed. They looked like two conspirators plotting an elaborate scheme. Your dad's just a walking ATM. Always has been, always will be, Brooklyn said, her voice dripping with disdain. Your real father, my boss Thomas, is the one who's going to take care of us. He's got more class, money, and brains than your loser dad could ever dream of. Once the divorce is finalized, he'll take us to his beach house. We'll be set. Won't that be nice? Alex leaned back, grinning. Finally, honestly, Mom, I don't know why you waited this long, Dad, such a pushover. It's about time we traded up, he said, the excitement in his voice turning my stomach. Thomas seems like a cool guy, and with his money, I can finally get that sports car we talked about. Maybe a Porsche. Brooklyn laughed, a sound that once brought me joy, but now felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Alex. First, we need to get your dad out of the picture. Alex smirked. He's too soft to fight back. This will be easy. I paused the video, unable to watch anymore. My stomach churned, and my breath came in shallow gasps. My wife's betrayal was bad enough, but Alex's complicity was an entirely different kind of pain. My own son, the boy I'd raised and loved, was not just aware of the betrayal but fully on board. The emotions hit me all at once: rage, heartbreak, disbelief. I wanted to march into Alex's room and demand answers, to call Brooklyn and confront her, but I knew better. If they'd spent this much time planning, they'd also prepared their excuses. Instead, I closed the laptop and sat in the dark kitchen. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, a cruel reminder of the normalcy they'd shattered. My thoughts raced, but one thing was clear. I needed a plan. The next morning, I carried on as usual. Over breakfast, Brooklyn sat at the table scrolling through her phone while Alex shoveled cereal into his mouth. I fought to keep my voice steady as I asked, "So, Alex, any plans for the weekend?" He barely glanced up. "Not really. Probably hang out with friends." Brooklyn chimed in, her tone overly casual. "Don't forget we have that dinner at Thomas's place Friday night, Alex." "All right." Alex's face lit up. He said we could take his Maserati for a spin. The sheer audacity of their openness nearly made me choke on my toast. I forced a smile. "Sounds like a fancy evening. What's the occasion?" Brooklyn shrugged, her tone dismissive. "Just a work thing. Networking." "Right," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Have fun." As they left the table, I clenched my fists under the table. They thought I was clueless, but I was about to show them how wrong they were. That evening, after Brooklyn and Alex had gone to bed, I began my work. I needed more than just the recording. I needed leverage. Over the next few days, I scoured our shared accounts, uncovering transactions that confirmed my suspicions. Expensive dinners, high-end jewelry, and even a weekend stay at a luxury resort, all charged to our joint credit card. By the end of the week, I had a clear picture. Brooklyn and Thomas weren't just colleagues. They were deeply intertwined. And Alex's enthusiasm for Thomas wasn't just about the money. He saw him as a replacement for me. The next confrontation came unexpectedly. One evening, as I reviewed more footage, Alex walked into the kitchen. He stopped when he saw me at the laptop, his face unreadable. "What are you doing?" he asked, his tone cautious. I closed the laptop slowly, meeting his gaze. "Just catching up on some things." "Why?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "No reason. Just you've been acting weird lately." I stood, pushing the chair back with deliberate slowness. "Weird how?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know. Like you're watching us or something." I stepped closer, forcing him to look up at me. Should I be Alex? Is there something I should know? His eyes darted away, and he muttered no. Forget it. Good, I said, my voice cold. Because if there's something you're hiding, I'll find out. Alex left the kitchen without another word, but the tension lingered. He knew something was off, and that was fine. Let him squirm. Friday night arrived, and Brooklyn and Alex left for their dinner at Thomas's mansion. I watched from the window as they climbed into her car, laughing about something. The sight was almost surreal, the two people I loved most in the world driving off to celebrate my replacement. As their car disappeared down the street, I turned back to my laptop. The evidence was damning, but it wasn't enough. I needed to confront Thomas himself. If Brooklyn and Alex were so comfortable mocking me, I wanted to see how Thomas would react when faced with the man he'd betrayed. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized from Brooklyn's recent calls. It rang twice before a smooth, confident voice answered. Hello, Thomas, I said, keeping my tone calm. This is Brooklyn's husband. There was a pause, then a chuckle. Well, this is unexpected. To what do I owe the pleasure? We need to talk, I said. In person? I'm not sure that's a good idea, he replied, his voice cautious now. Oh, I think it is, I said, letting some of my anger seep into my voice. Unless you want me to bring this to your board of directors. Another pause, longer this time. Then fine. Tomorrow. My office. Noon. I hung up without responding. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait. Brooklyn filed for divorce a month later. The papers arrived in a thick envelope, hand-delivered by a courier. I stood in the doorway, staring at the stack of demands, the house, alimony, a sizable portion of my business assets. She wanted everything. That evening, we had our first face-to-face confrontation. Brooklyn sat across the dining table, looking calm and composed, while I tried to keep my temper in check. This is outrageous, I said, holding up the divorce papers. You expect me to just hand over everything I've worked for? Brooklyn shrugged, sipping her wine. You're not going to fight this, are you? It'll only drag things out. Alex and I deserve a fresh start. A fresh start? My voice rose, despite my efforts to stay calm. With my money in my house? She leaned back, her gaze icy. Don't be dramatic, David. This is just business. Besides, Thomas has better lawyers than you could ever afford. I wanted to lash out, to say something that would shake her composure, but I held back. Instead, I nodded slowly, a plan already forming in my mind. We'll see about that. The courtroom was a battleground. Brooklyn arrived dressed in a tailored suit, her lawyer, a polished man named Richard, flanking her. Alex sat by her side, avoiding my gaze. He was their star witness, ready to spin a narrative that painted me as the villain. When it was Alex's turn to testify, I felt a pang of something deeper than anger. Betrayal. My own son stood on the witness stand, confidently recounting fabricated stories of my supposed neglect and controlling behavior. Dad never supported me, Alex said, glancing at Brooklyn for reassurance. He was always too busy with work. Mom's the one who's been there for me. The opposing lawyer pounced. So, you'd say your father was absent emotionally and physically? Yeah, Alex replied, his voice steady. He'd rather spend time at the office than with his family. I clenched my fists under the table, forcing myself to stay silent. This was part of their plan, but I had my own moves to make. When it was my turn to testify, I took a deep breath and walked to the stand. My lawyer, Samantha, had coached me well. Mr. Carter, Samantha began, her tone measured. You've heard the accusations against you. How do you respond? I glanced at Alex, then at Brooklyn. I've always worked hard to provide for my family. Every late night at the office, every deal I closed, it was all for them. To hear my son say I was absent, it's painful. But it's not true. Samantha nodded. Let's talk about the financial aspect of this case. Can you explain why you've contested the division of assets? I took a moment, letting the courtroom's silence stretch. Because this isn't just about money. It's about betrayal. I have evidence that Brooklyn, I paused, meeting her startled gaze, has been unfaithful, and that my son has been complicit in a scheme to take everything from me. The courtroom erupted into murmurs. Brooklyn's lawyer immediately objected. but the judge allowed me to continue. I have recordings, I said firmly, of Brooklyn and Alex discussing their plans, and evidence of Brooklyn's relationship with her boss, Thomas. Brooklyn's composure cracked. "You're lying," she hissed, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. Samantha handed a USB drive to the bailiff. "Your Honor, we'd like to submit this as evidence." The judge's face remained impassive as he signaled for the video to be played. The courtroom watched in silence as the footage revealed Brooklyn and Alex's damning conversation. Brooklyn's face paled. Alex shifted uncomfortably, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. When the video ended, the room was thick with tension. "Do you have anything to say, Mrs. Carter?" the judge asked. Brooklyn's lawyer scrambled to recover. "This doesn't change the fact that Mr. Carter has been neglectful. The video is irrelevant to the custody and financial matters at hand." But the damage was done. Brooklyn's calm facade was shattered, and Alex's testimony lost its credibility. The judge ordered a recess, and I stepped outside, breathing deeply for the first time in weeks. During the break, Brooklyn approached me in the hallway. Gone was her confident demeanor. She looked desperate. "David," she said, her voice low, "we don't have to do this. We can settle this quietly." I stared at her, incredulous. "Quietly? After everything you've done?" "I made a mistake," she admitted, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "But we can fix this. For Alex's sake." Alex's sake. The words felt hollow. "You mean for your sake," I said, my voice hard. "No, Brooklyn. You made your bed. Now lie in it." Her expression turned icy. "You'll regret this, David." I leaned in, my voice a whisper. "Not as much as you will." By the end of the trial, the tide had turned in my favor. The judge saw through Brooklyn's lies, and Alex's testimony was dismissed as biased. The house remained mine, as did the majority of my business assets. Brooklyn and Alex were left with far less than they'd expected. As I walked out of the courtroom, victorious, I felt a mix of emotions. Relief, vindication, and a lingering sadness for what had been lost. But one thing was clear. I wasn't the clueless pushover they'd taken me for. The battle was over, but my journey was just beginning. The courtroom victory had been a battle, but the war wasn't over. Brooklyn and Alex had underestimated me before, and I wasn't about to let them regroup. They thought their lies and betrayal had left me shattered. But I was far from broken. I had the momentum now, and I planned to use it. The first step in my new offensive was hiring a private investigator. I needed leverage. Something to dismantle Thomas's facade and unravel his world the way he'd tried to unravel mine. His wealth and influence had given Brooklyn and Alex the confidence to betray me, but if I could strip him of that, their entire scheme would collapse. "Mr. Carter, I'll need a few weeks," said the investigator, a sharp-eyed man named Timothy. "Thomas Reynolds is a well-connected man, but everyone has skeletons. If he's hiding something, I'll find it." "Good," I replied, sliding a folder across the desk. "Start with these." Inside were copies of suspicious transactions, social media posts, and some initial leads I'd dug up myself. Timothy gave a small nod of approval. "Looks like you've already done some homework." "Just make sure you dig deeper," I said. "I want everything." While Timothy worked, I focused on Brooklyn's financial activities. Our joint accounts had been drained significantly during the months leading up to the divorce. At first, I'd assumed it was for household expenses or Alex's college fund. Now I knew better. I spent hours poring over bank statements and credit card transactions. A pattern emerged, consistent withdrawals and transfers to an account I didn't recognize. I contacted my lawyer, Samantha, with the findings. "She's been funneling money into a private account," I said, laying out the evidence during a meeting in her office. Samantha's brow furrowed as she flipped through the documents. "This could be grounds for a fraud claim," she said. "We'll need to subpoena the bank records to confirm, but this could turn the screws on her." "Do it," I said firmly, "and let's see where else this trail leads." A week later, Timothy returned with his findings. He placed a thick envelope on my desk and sat across from me, his expression grim but satisfied. "Thomas Reynolds is as dirty as they come," Timothy said. "There's a history of financial fraud, questionable business dealings, and multiple lawsuits from former partners. Most of them settled out of court, but the pattern is clear. I opened the envelope, pulling out photos, documents, and transcripts. Timothy continued. He's also been using company funds for personal expenses, luxury vacations, gifts, even the renovations on his beach house. If this gets out, it could ruin him. I studied the evidence, a plan forming in my mind. What about Brooklyn? I asked. Does she know? Hard to say, Timothy replied. But given how intertwined they are financially, she's likely benefiting from his schemes. Perfect, I said, leaning back in my chair. Let's make sure they feel the pressure. That evening, I confronted Brooklyn indirectly. Over dinner, I brought up Thomas casually, watching her reaction closely. I heard something interesting about Thomas today, I said, cutting into my steak. Brooklyn looked up, her expression carefully neutral. Oh, what's that? Just some rumors about his business practices, I said, feigning nonchalance. Apparently, not everything is as clean as it seems. She hesitated, then forced a laugh. People love to gossip about successful men. It's jealousy. Maybe, I replied, meeting her gaze. But sometimes where there's smoke, there's fire. Her fork clattered against her plate, and she quickly excused herself from the table. I watched her retreat, satisfied that my words had hit their mark. The next day, Samantha called with an update. We've subpoenaed the bank records, she said, and it's worse than we thought. Brooklyn's account isn't just for siphoning money. She's been using it to fund lavish trips and gifts, likely for Thomas. Good, I said. Use it to build our case. And let's make sure Thomas's name comes up in every filing. Samantha chuckled. You're enjoying this, aren't you? You have no idea, I replied. My next move was to leak select pieces of information to Thomas's competitors. A few anonymous tips about his fraudulent activities were enough to start a firestorm within his industry. News articles began circulating, questioning his integrity and calling for investigations. Brooklyn and Alex, oblivious to my involvement, seemed increasingly tense at home. Thomas has been stressed lately, Brooklyn said one evening, her tone edged with worry. It's affecting his work. I'm sure he'll manage, I said, barely hiding my smirk. Alex chimed in. He's got the resources to handle anything. People just want to bring him down because he's successful. Let's hope so, I replied, my voice calm. For your sake. They didn't catch the edge of my words, but I savored the irony. The empire they'd hitched their future to was crumbling, and they didn't even realize it. A week later, the final piece fell into place. Timothy uncovered a series of emails between Thomas and Brooklyn, discussing not just their relationship, but their plans to siphon more money from my assets post-divorce. The emails were damning, filled with arrogance and entitlement. I forwarded the emails to Samantha immediately. This is the nail in the coffin, I said. Make sure the judge sees them. Consider it done, she replied. They've dug their own graves. As I hung up, I felt a sense of satisfaction unlike anything I'd experienced before. Brooklyn, Alex, and Thomas had underestimated me, but they were about to learn just how wrong they'd been. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the judge entered. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my lawyer, Samantha, beside me. Brooklyn and her attorney, Richard, were on the other side, flanked by Alex and Thomas. Their smug confidence earlier in the proceedings had been replaced by unease. The judge called for silence, and Samantha stood, addressing the court. Your Honor, we have evidence to present that changes the scope of this case. Richard scoffed. Another baseless accusation, I presume? Samantha ignored him and handed a thick file to the bailiff. Contained in this file are financial records, communications, and documented fraud implicating Thomas Reynolds and Brooklyn Carter. The judge adjusted his glasses as he began to skim the contents. Mr. Reynolds, he said, glancing up, this is serious. Thomas's expression hardened. Your Honor, the judge cut him off. You'll have your turn to speak. For now, I'll allow the plaintiff's attorney to present their findings. Samantha projected the first exhibit onto the courtroom screen, a series of emails between Thomas and Brooklyn, detailing their financial schemes. Brooklyn gasped audibly, while Thomas's face turned an alarming shade of red. As you can see, Samantha continued, the defendants not only conspired to defraud my client, but Mr. Reynolds also engaged in illegal activities to funnel company funds into personal accounts. This directly ties to the lavish lifestyle Brooklyn Carter sought to maintain post-divorce. Brooklyn's lawyer sprang to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. This is irrelevant to the divorce proceedings. The judge raised a hand. Overruled. This speaks directly to the credibility of the defendants. Next, Samantha displayed financial statements that showed Brooklyn's secret account and the extravagant purchases made with my money. I leaned back in my chair, watching Brooklyn squirm. Alex stared at the table, his earlier bravado completely gone. Finally, Samantha played the damning video footage I'd captured weeks ago. The courtroom fell silent as Brooklyn's voice echoed through the room. Your dad's just a walking it. Once the divorce is finalized, Thomas will take care of us. Alex's voice followed, dripping with arrogance. Finally, with his cash, I'll get that sports car. When the video ended, the silence was deafening. The judge's face was unreadable, but I could feel the tide shifting. During a recess, Brooklyn approached me in the hallway, her expression frantic. David, we can fix this, she pleaded. We don't have to go to war. I laughed bitterly. Fix this? After everything you've done? Tears welled in her eyes. Think about Alex. He's your son. Don't ruin his life over this. Alex made his choice, I said coldly. And so did you. Now, you'll face the consequences. As I walked away, I heard her sobbing, but I felt no sympathy. This was justice. When court resumed, the judge's verdict was swift and unforgiving. The house was to be sold, with proceeds going to me. I retained the majority of my business assets, and Brooklyn was ordered to return the funds she'd siphoned. Additionally, Thomas faced a separate investigation for fraud, his empire on the verge of collapse. As the judge delivered his final statements, Brooklyn's composure crumbled. You can't do this to us, she screamed, her voice breaking. I turned to face her, my voice as cold as steel. Watch me. You made your bed. Now lie in it. Alex stepped forward, his expression a mixture of anger and desperation. Dad, please. Don't let them take everything. We're still family. I looked at him, feeling the weight of his betrayal. Family? You stopped being my son the moment you chose greed over loyalty. This is what you wanted. Enjoy it. As I left the courtroom, I felt an overwhelming sense of liberation. Brooklyn and Alex had underestimated me, but they'd learned their lesson. Their dreams of a Malibu beach house and luxury cars were in ruins, and Thomas's world was crumbling around him. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. The reckoning was complete, and I was free to rebuild my life on my terms. The gavel had fallen on my old life, and with it, the final remnants of my broken family were swept away. For months, I had been consumed by rage and the need for justice. Now, standing in the empty shell of what used to be my home, I felt an unfamiliar mix of emotions, freedom, grief, and determination. The house sold quickly. Watching the moving truck pull away with the last of my belongings, I felt the weight of my old life lifting. I relocated to a city hundreds of miles away, a place where no one knew my name, my past, or my scars. Starting over wasn't easy. My mornings began early, with hours at the gym to rebuild my body and mind. The physical exertion cleared my head, replacing the anger that had burned for so long with a renewed sense of purpose. I threw myself into my work, expanding my business into new markets. Each victory, no matter how small, was a reminder that I was capable of rebuilding everything that had been taken from me, and more. One evening, after a particularly long day at the office, I decided to stop by a quiet cafe near my apartment. I was nursing a cup of coffee when a voice broke through my thoughts. Excuse me, is this seat taken? I looked up to see a woman about my age, her warm smile and kind eyes catching me off guard. No, go ahead, I replied, gesturing to the chair. She set her book and coffee down, glancing at me with a mix of curiosity and politeness. You look like you've had a long day. I chuckled. You could say that. It's been a long year, actually. She tilted her head slightly, a spark of interest in her expression. Sometimes the toughest years lead to the best ones. I'm Georgia, by the way. David, I said, shaking her hand. What started as a brief conversation turned into hours of talking. Georgia's wit and intelligence were refreshing, her insight surprising. She wasn't just kind, she was sharp, with a depth that drew me in. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I laughed, a genuine, unguarded laugh. As the weeks turned into months, Georgia and I grew closer. She was a writer, passionate about storytelling, and deeply empathetic. Unlike Brooklyn, who had always dismissed my dreams and ambitions, Georgia encouraged me, challenging me in ways that made me better. She listened without judgment, her presence a balm to wounds I hadn't realized were still healing. One evening, as we walked through the city park, I opened up about my past. I told her about the betrayal, the courtroom battles, and the emptiness I'd felt afterward. Georgia didn't interrupt or offer empty platitudes. When I finished, she simply said, "It sounds like you've been through hell, but the fact that you're still standing says a lot about you." Her words stayed with me. They weren't laced with pity or judgment, just quiet admiration. My business thrived in ways I hadn't anticipated. The lessons I'd learned from my battles with Brooklyn and Thomas gave me an edge. I made smarter investments, built stronger partnerships, and expanded my reach. Success didn't feel hollow anymore, it felt earned. One afternoon, as I reviewed the quarterly reports, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Georgia. "Dinner at my place tonight? I've got a surprise." That evening, I arrived at her apartment to find the table set with candles and a home-cooked meal. Georgia greeted me with a smile, her excitement contagious. As we ate, she slid an envelope across the table. "What's this?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Open it and see," she said, her grin widening. Inside was a plain ticket. "It's for next weekend," she explained. "You've been working so hard, I thought you could use a getaway. And I might have booked one for myself, too." For a moment, I was speechless. No one had ever gone out of their way for me like this before. "Georgia, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," she replied, her eyes sparkling. The trip was a turning point. On a quiet beach under the stars, Georgia and I shared stories, dreams, and hopes for the future. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe in the possibility of a new beginning. When we returned, I asked her to move in with me. It was a big step, but one that felt right. Georgia brought a sense of balance and joy to my life, filling the empty spaces that had lingered since Brooklyn and Alex's betrayal. As the years passed, my life transformed in ways I hadn't imagined. Georgia and I married in a small ceremony, surrounded by close friends and new family. Together, we built a home filled with laughter, love, and two beautiful children who became the center of our world. Every now and then, I'd hear whispers of Brooklyn and Alex's struggles. Thomas had been convicted of fraud, leaving them with nothing. Alex had dropped out of college, and Brooklyn worked a dead-end job to make ends meet. Their bitterness was palpable, especially when they saw me with Georgia and our kids, thriving in a way they'd never believed possible. I didn't gloat or seek further revenge. Their suffering was their own doing, and I had moved on. My energy was focused on the life I'd rebuilt, a life full of purpose, love, and second chances. Looking back, I realized that losing Brooklyn and Alex wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of something far greater. The city's bustling streets and the laughter of strangers had become my sanctuary. But every now and then, whispers of Brooklyn and Alex's downfall would reach me. It wasn't something I sought out. People from our old life had a way of relaying the gossip with a mix of shock and schadenfreude. I had moved on, yet hearing about their spiral into ruin stirred a complicated mix of emotions, vindication and pity. The news came in bits and pieces. Thomas, their supposed savior, had been convicted on multiple counts of fraud. His assets were frozen, his empire dismantled, and his name disgraced. The high-flying lifestyle Brooklyn had envisioned was now a distant dream. She and Alex were left stranded, with no home, no money, and no one to turn to. Brooklyn tried to find work, but her history with Thomas and the court case had tarnished her reputation. Alex, who had always coasted on entitlement, struggled to adapt to a life where no one catered to his whims. They bounced from shelters to cheap motels, their existence reduced to survival. It was a rainy afternoon when they appeared in my office. The receptionist's voice crackled over the intercom. David, there are two people here claiming to know you. They are insistent. Names? I asked, though I already suspected. Brooklyn Carter and Alex Carter, she replied cautiously. My heart sank momentarily, but I pushed the feeling aside. Send them in. The door opened, and there they stood. Brooklyn looked thinner, her face etched with lines of worry. Alex's arrogance had been replaced by a nervous energy. They didn't look like the people I once called family. They were shadows of their former selves. David, Brooklyn began, her voice trembling. Thank you for seeing us. I gestured for them to sit, but said nothing. We need help, she continued, clasping her hands together. We've lost everything. Thomas, he abandoned us after the trial. We've been struggling to get back on our feet, but no one will hire me. And Alex cut in, his voice breaking. Dad, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I thought we were making the right choice. I was stupid. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. You thought Thomas was the right choice. You thought money and luxury were more important than loyalty. Brooklyn's eyes filled with tears. We made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But we're still your family. Please, David, give us another chance. I let the silence stretch, watching them squirm. Finally, I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. Do you remember what I told you in court, Brooklyn? I asked, my voice calm. You made your bed. Now lie in it. Her tears spilled over. David, please. We're desperate. We have nowhere else to go. And whose fault is that? I said, turning to face them. You betrayed me. Both of you. You didn't just take my trust. You destroyed it. Alex's head hung low, but he looked up at me, his voice shaking. I'm your son. Doesn't that mean anything? You stopped being my son the moment you chose to stand against me. I replied coldly. You testified in court, Alex. You called me controlling and neglectful. Do you have any idea what that felt like? He had no answer. The silence was deafening. Brooklyn tried again, desperation clawing at her voice. David, I'll do anything. I'll pay back the money. I'll work for free. Just don't let us go back to the streets. Her words hit a nerve, but I forced myself to stay resolute. It's not my responsibility to fix the mess you created. You wanted Thomas, Brooklyn. You wanted his life, his promises. Where is he now? Her sobs filled the room. Alex looked like he wanted to disappear. I felt a twinge of pity, but reminded myself of the betrayal, the callousness of their words and actions. David, Alex said softly, I'll make it right. Whatever it takes. Just don't leave us like this. I walked back to my desk, staring at them for a moment. You made your choices. Now deal with the consequences. They left my office in tears, their pleas echoing in my mind long after the door closed. I stood there, staring at the empty chairs where they had sat. For years, I had dreamed of this moment, their humiliation, their regret. And now that it had come, I felt no joy, only a hollow sense of finality. A week later, I received a letter from Brooklyn. The handwriting was shaky, the words filled with desperation. David, I don't know if you'll even read this, but I have to try. We've hit rock bottom. Alex is sick, and I can't afford to take him to a doctor. I've applied for dozens of jobs, but no one will hire me. I know I hurt you in ways I can never undo, but I'm begging you, for Alex's sake, not mine, please help us. Brooklyn, I stared at the letter for a long time. Alex's face flashed in my mind, not the arrogant young man who had betrayed me, but the little boy who used to run into my arms after school. The conflict in my chest was overwhelming, but I reminded myself of everything they had done. Sympathy was a luxury they hadn't afforded me when they tore my life apart. I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer. I couldn't allow their suffering to derail the new life I had built. Some lessons had to be learned the hard way. Weeks turned into months, and the updates about Brooklyn and Alex grew fewer. They had become invisible in the city they once tried to conquer. Meanwhile, my life flourished. Georgia and I were planning a vacation with the kids, and my business was expanding internationally. One day, while walking through a park with Georgia and our children, I spotted a familiar figure. Brooklyn was sitting on a bench, her clothes worn, her hair unkempt. Alex sat beside her, thinner and pale. They didn't notice me, and I didn't stop. I held George's hand a little tighter and kept walking, leaving the past where it belonged. Years passed, and here I was, standing on the porch of my new home, feeling the weight of everything that had happened slowly lifting from my shoulders. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the yard. My twin daughters, Ellie and Ava, played happily in the grass, their laughter filling the air as they chased each other. Their small feet thudded against the earth as they ran, their joy contagious. Georgia stood beside me, her arm around my waist, her smile as bright as ever. She didn't say much, but the way she looked at me told me everything I needed to know. The past felt so distant now. I could hardly recognize the person I was back then. Life had a way of moving forward, regardless of the mistakes and regrets we carried. And I had made plenty of those. But I was no longer defined by them. A distant figure caught my attention. It was Brooklyn. She stood at the edge of the yard, her gaze fixed on me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite read. Beside her, Alex lingered in the background, arms crossed, his posture stiff, like he was trying to keep himself distant, yet his eyes were locked on Georgia and me. I could feel the weight of their stares, a reminder of everything we had once shared and lost. They thought they could break me, I said quietly, more to myself than anyone else. Georgia shifted beside me, her hand gently squeezing mine. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft, almost cautious. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I'm more than okay," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm stronger than ever." The words didn't feel empty. They felt true, like a promise I had made to myself long ago, and now I could finally keep it. Georgia squeezed my hand again, her eyes following mine as Brooklyn and Alex remained motionless, just watching. The silence between us seemed endless, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as if the past had been settled, and there was nothing left to prove. They had their lives, and I had mine. We didn't need to dwell on the past anymore. Ellie's laughter snapped me out of my thoughts. Ava had managed to tag her twin, and now they were both on the ground, rolling around in the grass, giggling uncontrollably. I couldn't help but smile, the warmth of their happiness washing over me. Georgia shifted slightly, her eyes lingering on the girls. "You're a good mother," she said quietly. I shrugged, pretending I didn't know what she meant. "They're good kids," I replied. "I just try to keep up." "They're lucky to have you," Georgia said, her voice carrying a sincerity I hadn't heard in years. I met her gaze and smiled. Georgia had always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. And now, standing here beside her, I realized how much she had helped me heal. Brooklyn moved first. She crossed the yard, her steps slow and deliberate, until she stopped just a few feet away from where we stood. Her face was unreadable, her lips pressed together in a thin line. "I see you've moved on," Brooklyn said, her voice thick with something I couldn't place. She glanced briefly at the girls, then back at me. Georgia stepped closer to me, her hand resting protectively on my arm. I could see the tension in Brooklyn's stance, the way she was still trying to make sense of everything that had happened. I replied simply, my voice steady. Brooklyn glanced at Georgia, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I guess I shouldn't be surprised. You always did have a way of bouncing back." "I had to," I said, the bitterness from the past finally fading into a quiet understanding. "I didn't have a choice." Brooklyn's gaze softened, just a little. "I don't know what happened between us, but I'm sorry." Alex stepped forward then, his arms still crossed, his expression distant. He didn't say anything, just watched us silently, as if waiting for something. I could feel the weight of his stare, but I didn't let it affect me. "Sorry for what?" I asked, turning my attention to him. "For not telling me the truth? For leaving when things got hard? For betraying me when I needed you the most?" Alex flinched at the harshness in my voice, but he didn't retreat. Instead, he stood there, silent and unmoving, his eyes shadowed with regret. I don't know how to fix this," Brooklyn murmured, her voice breaking slightly. "I don't know if I ever can." "You don't have to," I said, my words calm but firm. "You can't fix the past, Brooklyn, but you can learn from it." I took a deep breath, letting the years of pain and disappointment settle in my chest before letting it go. I'm not angry anymore. I used to be, but not anymore. I've learned that holding on to anger only holds me back. Alex glanced at Brooklyn before his gaze returned to me. His eyes held a hint of apology, but also something else, a recognition that what we had was gone, that there was no going back. I'm glad things worked out for you, Alex finally said, his voice rough. You deserve happiness. Thanks, I said, giving him a small nod. I think I've finally found it. There was a long silence, each of us standing in the yard, the weight of the past hanging in the air, but not suffocating us. It was as if everything had been said, and nothing more needed to be spoken. After a moment, Georgia spoke up again, breaking the tension. It's getting late. The girls will need to go inside soon. I nodded in agreement. You're right. They've had enough excitement for one day. I turned to walk toward the house, but before I could take another step, I heard Brooklyn's voice again. Are you sure you're okay? She asked, her tone softer now. I paused, turning back toward her. For a moment, I just looked at her, considering her question. The years of hurt, the betrayal, the confusion, it all seemed so distant now. I'm better than okay, I said, my voice steady. I'm at peace. With that, I turned and walked into the house, closing the door behind me. The past, with all its broken pieces, was finally behind me. Ahead, there was only the future, full of promise, full of love, and full of hope. And I was ready for it.